which is Sexual Ethics in Scripture. So we would love for you to join us either in person or online. And if also, we are been doing this for 2 years, so we're happy to celebrate our 2-year anniversary next week. And with that, this costs money to, run. Even though we are blessed to have a free space, but we have to do other things. So if you feel it's so inclined, you can either give in person or give online at newagechurch.com. All right, so tonight we are going to talk about radical action, advancing racial equity, and this is more geared towards white Christians, more specifically women, but it doesn't matter because I will explain later about how women are kind of, especially white women, are upholding the patriarchy. Basically, we're kind of underneath, with comfort, trying to hold up that patriarchy, thinking we could possibly be kind of how people think they can be billionaires one day. That's kind of the concept. So we will start about that. So let me start. All right. So basically, why it's important. So I've done a lot of reading, researching, listening, finding Black, mostly people, educators, either online or in person. And I admit 100% that this is not, my area of expertise. But with that said, I also want to say how important it is to learn about it, because that is one of the keys to basically trying to break all of these structures that have been put in place for 400 plus years. So why it's important? Addressing systemic radical inequities requires immediate and transformative action. Disparities in wealth, education, and opportunities must be confronted, especially for Black men. Challenging settler colonialism structures and promoting economic justices are crucial as the resistance of white women against perpetuating the white patriarchy. A comprehensive approach is necessary to address the multi-factor impacts of systemic racism and settler colonialism. So, yes, we are going way back, but so basically, I'm going to bring Jesus. So Jesus said, "The blessed are those who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God." As we've learned last month when Brian was talking about the book Taking Back the Radical Jesus. So basically, we tend to think that, with in the church, other churches, that you're blessed if you have things. So, but basically, Jesus came to remind us that we need to take care of the marginalized and oppressed. That is basically our job. So, and why I'm going all the way back is because basically, throughout history, society has been upholding these systems, but it started, interestingly enough, with the Catholic Church in the 1600s with the Doctrine of Discovery, and that was basically giving permission to go around the world and go into places and displacing indigenous people and bringing the Word of God to them. But that led to mass killings and all of those kinds of things. And ever since then, we've kind of just been holding up that structure. And also, one interesting thing is that whiteness wasn't even a thing until around the 1600s. They didn't label people by the color of their skin. So back then, it was more of where you were from, like around the world. And then even when slavery started, they needed whiteness to help uphold that patriarchy, because so then the poor people, white people, they gave them power by making them managers of plantations. So making them managers of plantations set the hierarchy structure. So then it was like, okay, these managers of the plantations hoped to be the plantation owner one day. So it gave them the power that they needed to then see Black slaves as the other. So basically, it's all around dehumanization, and our whole society has been built upon dehumanization since then. So I'm going to talk about these So the challenges of the system. So economic disparities. Settler colonialism often included the exploration of the land and resources from the indigenous people, with sometimes leading to establishments of economic based on exploitation and inequities. In regions where black communities were historically enslaved or subject to discrimination, practices these economic disparities persisted. So, so systemic racism, as I talked about, like it's just basically how our society is built. So it affects housing policies, education, employment, loans, criminal justice systems that we talked about in the past. All of the systems that we have underlying issues of racism. Cultural homogeny. So basically, also with indigenous, but also all of the societies. We talked about like the melting pot. So, but the melting pot like actually was a bad thing because all of their history and their culture and everything was destroyed because they didn't want them to carry on their traditions of where they were from, or even with indigenous where they being here. So they wanted them to not speak their language. They didn't want them not to have different hairs or any of those kinds of things. They wanted them to be assimilated into the society, which then stripped away all of their historic history and all their culture. But they fought to keep it. Also, it was interesting that I learned too about this is that they actually even had another Bible for slaves. They actually took out all the parts about like the uprisings and all of the like people overcoming oppression. So they stripped out all of those parts as well. And then obviously with all of the systemic racism, access to resources and services are also affected. And then one of the things we also get wrong are like intersectionality. So because systemic racism affects all these systems, they also cross over to LGBTQ and all of any oppressed community, just disabled. It crosses over, so it's impacting everybody. So that was why it's important to realize that the saying is like, if it's not the same, but it's when you are, they didn't come from their, I didn't stand up because it wasn't me, that where you say that, and then you're the last one standing and when everybody else is gone because you didn't stand up for your brother and sister. And you didn't stand up for what Jesus taught us to do. So basically, the key is education. And our education system is not adequate to address this. We all know that we have learned history the way it should have been taught. Our books are controlled by, people that don't want us to learn certain things. Now, with even in certain states, with book bans, and there's also been book bans throughout history. So, and the other thing is both sides of ism. That's something that comes up a lot. It's like, well, what about the other side? We really need to learn about all of these things because if you don't, a lot of people will say, well, it's getting better and can't we just move on? Or if you don't learn about the past, you're going to repeat in the future. So two of the women that I picked that I kind of wanted to just kind of touch on that I've been learning from, these aren't the only two, but I went to a women's conference in November, and Dr. Nikki Lanier, she is really trying to get this issue front and center, especially for white women. So she hosted this 3-day event where it was Black women and men teaching white women how to uncover their implicit biases and just really like think about things in a different way. And then try and learn how to have conversations with people, because that's also challenging when people don't want to hear what you have to say, or just when you hear something and then you ask them and you feel like you're feeling uncomfortable, like that you might not know enough to like have a conversation. So one of the things we learned was just like asking questions like, well, tell me more about that and why do you think that? And and if you have some of these, which I'll show you at the end, some resources in your back pocket, you can say, well, maybe you should think about it this way. And then Loretta Ross, I actually, again, showing my complete ignorance, my white ignorance. Like, I actually just learned about her also in November. She was at a women's march up in Milwaukee, and she's been, a trailblazer in the reproductive justice and human rights for decades. And she's just an amazing woman. And I'll tell you a little bit more about a podcast that I listen to about calling people in instead of calling them out. So, I'm going to kind of skip these. And then basically, this is just, there is commonality. So, I feel like learning from people who have been in this arena for decades, those are the people we need to learn from, and those are the people we need to follow, and those are the people that, there is a lot of commonalities. It's not like it's recreating the wheel every time. So education and awareness, as we already talked about. And then policy reform. So all of these things sound really scary because there's a lot of things that have to happen in order to make this work. But pick a lane, pick just something that you think sparks your interest. We are not, one of the things I'm struggling with and learning is that I can't solve the world's problems all by myself, even though I want to. But you really have to like hone in on where you feel you can make it. So education, obviously, is key. Policy reform, there's a lot of things going on, paying attention to what's happening. We talk a lot about here about, we're going to be talking about like homeless, unhoused, all those kinds of things. So it's just, there's so many things that is happening, and we live in our bubble because we are working and doing all these things, and it's hard to pay attention to so many things. But policy reform is one thing that, especially at the local level, we can try to share what's happening with people. That would be helpful. Community organizing, I feel like we're kind of, there's a lot of also that going on around right now. I mean, we talked about Palestine in November, and interestingly enough, there is, I'm sure you've all heard of, or all know of Angela Davis. So she has a book called Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And she actually tied the Palestinian struggle to the Black struggle in America back in the 70s, because it's all about oppression. And those things are tied because the system is what's keeping everybody down. So just having boots on the ground and helping people if you don't want to go to marches and stuff, but just finding out like if there are things happening, support those things. Economic empowerment, that is one thing that we're doing at a new way. We are invested in a Black owned bank. Those things that you can do that it doesn't even require you to even spend any money. You can switch your bank to a Black owned bank, or support Black owned businesses, support local businesses. I mean, that will help everybody. Cultural diversity in media. This is, something that the Black community has always been trying to get attention on. The stereotype, like stop stereotyping and typecasting and those kinds of things. So if you see something or there's a specific group that you don't think that are representing people correctly, then maybe you shouldn't be watching those things. And then this is what I was talking about earlier, which so I listened to a podcast that Loretta Ross was on, and it was amazing, and it just got me really thinking about talking about things differently. And calling people in instead of calling them out. So when we hear something or see something or do something stupid, because again, we're all learning and it's all marginalized communities that we're learning about. So if we do something that offends, or we hear something that's offensive, or they might not know, calling them out in the moment is just going to put shame on that person, and they're not going to learn from that. So pulling them aside and saying, again, tell me more about like why you think that, or why you believe that, and have a conversation about it. You might not change their mind, but at least you get them thinking about like, oh, maybe I didn't know, because there's things I've learned. I learn stuff every day. We don't know everything. So just having a conversation with people instead of shaming them is not going to be helpful for anybody. So pitfalls of reform. So when educating and working with anti-racist, it's crucial to be aware of potential pitfalls, and here are some of the common ones. Tokenism. I just had the company that I work for is just starting up a diversity group, and my HR person was like, "Who should we pick?" And I'm like, "We need to be very careful because we're not very diverse." And so I had candid conversations with people that I knew that were, but because I've been in this conversation for like about 4 or 5 years, I built relationships with people and asked questions, and so I knew kind of who people would be willing to participate and others that would not be. But you can't just assume, and you don't. And like one of the participants that did join the committee was like on the call today was like, no, I do not want to be. I'm fine with joining the group, and I want to be very clear that I do not want to be the token person in the. So that is definitely a pitfall of when you start this thing, because you can't just assume that people are interested in teaching or wanting to educate because they have their own shit. Or even when we were doing with the George Floyd stuff, everybody was like, I heard so many people saying like, why are everybody asking us questions? Go read a book. It's, some of them might be willing to help educate, but we really need to do the work ourselves first. White savior complex. So the white savior complex refers to the tendency for privileged individuals, often white people, to position themselves as rescuers or heroes in an effort to address the system, perpetuating these parental. This is hard. So basically, this is where I try really hard not to fall into this, because I want to save the world, and I also know that there's a lot that I don't know. So I've been very careful and just wanting to just learn as much as possible, but also saying that I don't know everything when I do have these conversations, and I don't want to be the one. If there's somebody in the room that's better qualified, they should be the one speaking. And we just want to make sure that their voices, the marginalized communities' voices, are heard, and we're following their lead. We have in our group, we're trying to be diverse, but right now we think it's important here at A New Way to educate and have these conversations, because without it, even though we don't have the right people in the room at the moment, we're learning and we're trying to do what we think is the right thing to help everybody. Performative allyship, and this falls again under all marginalized communities, not just Black community. People. Lately. It's been like I've been hearing people more on the LGBT side and trans side that I've been following, where it's like you're with us until a certain point, or even on the Black community, where you're with us until it gets uncomfortable. You're with us until it gets dangerous. You're with us until fill in the blank. That is performative allyship. You have to get uncomfortable. You have to get in the weeds, and you have to get down and really be supportive. So Ignoring intersectionality. Um, Basically, there are a lot of, you know, people that fall under a bunch of different umbrellas. So you can't just assume that one person falls under just one system of oppression or one marginalization. And defensiveness and fragility. Defensiveness and fragility can arise when an individual feels personally attacked or challenged in discussions about systemic racism, leading to resistance, avoidance, dismissal of criticism, feedback, or other information. So basically, what I said earlier is like, this is hard work, and the people that don't know anything can get defensive and uncomfortable. So, in order to move forward, we do have to be uncomfortable, but calling people out on that uncomfortableness isn't going to be helpful. But just knowing when to meet people where they are, unfortunately, is part of the journey, and you have to really. One of the other things that I was talking with somebody about was like, I'm learning that I'm not going to be able to change everybody's mind to start thinking about these things. But maybe something I said will resonate with the next person or the next person after that. I'm really trying to learn, like, am I going back to like the mustard seed or the drop of water and like I might not be that person that makes that change, but at least the ripple effect maybe down the road will make that person, the person that is supposed to actually let them hear. So, color blindness. This is more of like people, for a while it's like, I don't see color, that's a joke, like, it's really just something that people I think use to hide behind and just pretend that the problem doesn't exist and it's going to go away, or it has gone away already, or it's not as bad as people think. And then lack of accountability. Holding people in your lives accountable. I mean, I've been lately more of like, okay, if they're ignorant of the situation, because we all have implicit biases, we all grew up in certain areas or learned certain things, and if we're not willing to learn, then maybe that's a problem. But if you're willing to learn, and if somebody's willing to learn, then it's not really a lack of accountability. But if people dig in their heels and are just not willing to learn, then they're not the person that you need to work on and you need to move forward. And then, being mindful of these as you're working, talking to people, organizations that you're working with, just make an effort to try and learn and grow. And then gratification begins with you. So, because if you're not educated, we can't help. And then I just put together a list of personal responsibilities. Again, educating yourself with information, leading by example. I think actions do speak louder than words. That was another thing that came up in the conversation today at our meeting. Was like, we can send out all these emails saying we're supporting Black History Month, but if we're not actually or supporting Pride or all these, or the Arab community or whatever community, if we're not actually just sending out an email is just a blank slate. We like an blank slate, but just like basically like we checked a box, we did our thing. Action, doing something, having a conversation, bringing in interviews, learning from people. Those are things that people can learn from and learn and starting to undehumanize people. Like if we get to know each other, we can see that we're the same. We're just humans. That's originally one race, and it's human race. Interpersonal relationships, again, kind of what we're doing here. We're just fostering safe spaces, learning about each other, going to other places, like going to places that you wouldn't normally go to, certain movies or restaurants or theaters, learning about the culture. I mean, Chicago is so diverse. There's so many things we can learn. Cultural shift. Systemic challenge. Basically, yeah. I mean, we're gonna get pushback. I mean, people don't want the system to change because it works for the powers that are making money off of it. So you just need to keep fighting for equity. And building solidarity, again, something we're doing here, just trying to keep relationships growing and learning. And in summary, radical action, advancing racial equity begins with individuals committing to educating themselves and dismantling their own biases by taking personal accountability, leading by example, fostering inclusive relationships, contributing to cultural shifts, advocating systemic change, building solidarity, and empowering themselves and others. Individuals can play a crucial role in creating a more just and equitable society. And then I have a bunch of resources that I put up here that we'll share in the online. So I have books. I probably would not do the white fragility based on some Black creators that I followed. They said that they're not really happy with that book. But I would add the one that I mentioned earlier, Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. Articles and essays, documentaries and films, and we're actually going to talk about the 13th in a couple months. In April. Podcasts and social media. And then remember, education is just one part of the journey of dismantling systemic racism. It's essential to complement learning with action, advocacy, and ongoing self-reflection. Thank you.